couple of veteran GMs saying no. Well, what about an old friend as the senior advisor to the Buffalo Sabres? That and plenty more coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the week, and thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can check us out on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show. Be sure to like and subscribe us there. And you can also hit us up on our text club. If you're not already a subscriber, you can do that by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. Today's episode is presented by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on a Monday. Watched a lot of hockey over the weekend and excited to talk a little more hockey today here on the show as we react and look ahead and we talk about Senior Advisor Watch. Advisor Watch. We have to figure out who this guy is going to be, or if the Sabres will even hire somebody that we know they want to, because there's been a lot of reporting about it. So we'll get into all of that. I've got an old name that I want to bring up for this job that I think will probably not make a lot of people feel great, but I'm thinking more and more about him for this senior advisor job that the Sabres are dangling out there to a couple of candidates. So that coming up. And a little bit later on in today's show, the next name in our exit interview series, not one of the major names, but it's a quick word on Jordan Greenway coming a little bit later on in today's show and the steps he took last year playing limited games because of injury, and also where I see him in the lineup going forward, because now that he's under a contract extension, that'll be part of his journey, is what is his role going to be going forward. So a little bit on him a little bit later on, but a lot on senior advisor. It's interesting, by the way, that this job, part of the reason I'm doing another show on it is I see fans on Twitter for the Sabres, and they're talking about who it could be and interested in who it could be, even though, I mean, you would not expect a senior advisor to really make that much of a difference or a mark on any old NHL team. If some other team hired whoever to be a senior advisor, you probably wouldn't bat an eye. It's not really a power position in an organization, but the bar here is so low that anybody you've heard of entering the organization is going to make you feel something one way or another. Eric Stahl last week on our last episode. Now I didn't like it for personal reasons, of course, but there were a lot of fans for the Sabres that went, why did you even really tell us this? This is not what we want. We want experience. We want someone that isn't in over their heads doing the job. And maybe Eric Stahl is that, but you're telling us or flaunting that this big hire you made is somebody that's never worked in a front office before. Like that really isn't the key that everybody's looking for. So the name they bring in that has experience, I think will, make people feel some things. Now that's if they even land it. But our starting point here was reports that the Sabres wanted this person, that they wanted somebody with GM experience to come in and be a, not quite a mentor, but another voice in the room for Kevyn Adams. So we get right into who they reached out to. And the names that pop up from Dave Pagnotta from the Fourth Period, who's a very plugged-in insider over the years in the NHL, he reports that the Sabres approached both Lou Lamoriello, who we did a full show on last week. If you missed that, you can check it out, and Ken Holland. But neither seemed interested in an advisory role. Now, a couple of things there. We talked a lot about Lou Lamoriello last week. You want to check that show out, please do. He is in his 80s. He is a strong personality in a front office. He, to me, never felt like a senior advisor type. That's a guy that wants to be in control if he is going to be in the building at all. And him being interested in a senior advisor role, to me, is not surprising at all. If he was offered GM, then maybe, but I'm not surprised by this. Holland, now we did not talk about him really much at all. Even I listened back to our show from the fall about potential replacements for Kevyn Adams. We even went into like assistant GMs around the league and experienced guys. Holland didn't really come up. Now, he was not in the league this past season. He was let go by the Edmonton Oilers 1 year ago, and that organization got turned over. So Holland, of course, has a long, long history of being an executive in the National Hockey League. And he is, he's more than 10 years younger than Lou Lamoriello, 69 years old. He was the GM for the Detroit Red Wings for 20 years, basically 1997 to 2019, and then Oilers from 2019 to 2024. So Ken Holland. Now, this is somebody that I have railed against in the last probably 5 years, 6, 7 years, because to me, this is certainly one of those individuals that I absolutely would trust and love to run my hockey team in 2003. But in 2025, I want no part of him being anywhere near my team because to me, for 5 years, he has demonstrated that the league has pretty much passed him by. And even though Edmonton did get to the finals, there was a lot in there in Edmonton that didn't necessarily go well. Now, trade-wise, that was, and contracts, like to me, they overcame him being the GM. Maybe that's unfair to him. And honestly, if the job is to find a guy who's been in the GM seat before and return some credibility to the organization without having his hands on the direct day-to-day, maybe Holland does make sense. Doesn't matter, though. He ain't interested. And like Lamoriello, I'd imagine that the only way you get a whale like that in the boat, a fish like that in the boat, is to give him the GM job. And the Sabres are not currently looking to do that, apparently. So, Holland out, Lamoriello out. But now we kind of know what and they'll be reporting about whether that's true or not, but it's out there. And it lines up with what they wanted from before. Now we kind of know what they are looking for, who they're calling. And these are the big guns they're going for. And it does kind of remind me of a situation that the Sabres just had happen 1 year ago, where they talked about wanting an experienced head coach in the NHL. Adams talking about that in his end-of-season press conference last year, a year ago. And then Andy Strickland from St. Louis, plugged in the Blues, reporting on Craig Berube, who was the Stanley Cup winning coach of the Blues, that he was going to Toronto. The Sabres tried to hire him. And Berube, to nobody's surprise, would have picked Toronto over Buffalo. So 1 year ago, the Sabres were looking for a credible hockey man, veteran coach to come in, be behind the bench. Sure enough, they do what they should do. They call Craig Berube. That is what they should do in that spot for who was available. Okay? He doesn't want to come here. Well, you're looking around, you're interviewing a bunch of people. Then I think actually, I don't remember the exact details of this. I think there was a dispute, wasn't there? Friedman reporting something and Adams saying something about how many people he interviewed and versus called, and maybe Adams overinflated how many, whatever. That was a year ago. But what they end up on? The guy they know. And more than that, in Lindy Ruff, the guy that would say yes because of a connection point to the organization and experience working with Kevyn Adams before, because Adams would have been his assistant on the bench. So they end up on Lindy. They try for the bigger names that were from other organizations. They don't get it. They end up on the guy they know, the guy that has a connection. Well, maybe that's the same thing that's happening with this role. And it wouldn't surprise me. But here's the weird thing about this, is if they start calling around and, all right, Lamoriello's not interested, and check that off, and okay, Ken Holland's not interested, let's check that off. Maybe they call Peter Chiarelli, who's a whatever in St. Louis right now, a VP in St. Louis, and maybe he's not interested, and you check that off. I hope he's the worst GM in NHL history, in my opinion, so I don't want any part of him. Maybe they call up Brian Burke. I always bring him up. Maybe they call up, it doesn't have to be a guy that was a GM in the league, but, who's the name? The last time we talked about Adams replacements in the fall, the name we talked about was Lawrence Gilman. I believe. Yeah, Lawrence Gilman, who's been a long-time assistant GM in the league, Maple Leafs and other teams. Even that's not a guy with a GM position in his past, but long-time hockey executive. They could call a guy like that. What if none of these people just want to come? I do think that's possible. I know what Jason Zucker said a month ago about, and it's not really a stigma of Buffalo around the league, is that people don't want to go there. Well, I see the evidence all the time that people don't want to come here. Matt Murray 2 years ago saying no to the Buffalo Sabres, and Berube picking Toronto. I know that's an easy one to pick the Leafs, but there are a lot of these examples over the years. If that starts happening one after another, well, what are we going to start looking for? And it's going to be who's got a connection to Buffalo? Who's got a connection to the organization? Who knows the GM? Who would be willing to work above the general manager? I understand why Lou Lamoriello might not want to do it, right? He could very well think Adams is in over his head and think, what are you kidding? I should be the GM. I really did think a lot this weekend about Darcy Regier. And I'm not even really kidding. I thought a lot about Darcy Regier for this position. Now, you might have just flown back in your chair like, what? Who? Darcy Regier in the year 2025. Did I just hear that name? You did. I have no idea what he is up to in his life. I actually looked to see any interviews or, social media even, like run-ins, like no idea. He stopped working for the Arizona Coyotes about 10 years ago. And since then has never worked in the league. He and the Coyotes split due to he left the job due to personal reasons. Don't know what that is, but February 2016, he left the Arizona Coyotes for personal reasons. So, guy hasn't been in the league, hasn't worked in hockey in 9 years. So, I'm not saying it's a good idea. What I'm saying is I'm looking for some boxes to check here for what the Sabres typically end up going for. We know they want for this job someone who's been a GM before, someone who's been a long-time veteran executive in the NHL. We also know they're going to need to work with, almost below Kevyn Adams, a willingness to do that. You also probably need somebody that's needs to know they're never going to be a GM again, right? Like I said this the other day, no 50-year-old up-and-coming executive or Rob Blake, someone that's been a GM in the league before, is going to want to be the senior advisor to Kevyn Adams. I don't think. Well, what about Darcy would not have any sights on being a GM again. So this would be his way if he's even interested in this. He might not be. Again, he left for personal reasons. Maybe the personal reasons was he hated working in a front office. And he had just done it for long enough. He wanted to try something else. I don't know. He might have no personal desire to do it. But if he does want to work in a front office or maybe wants to try it again, this is kind of an advisory role where you don't have a lot of the pressures of being the GM on a day-to-day basis, and maybe it's a little different for him. So again, this is kind of a ridiculous idea, but it checks a lot of their boxes that they're looking for. Guy who's been a GM before, and there's a connection point to both the organization and Kevyn Adams. Because when Regier was the GM, Adams would have been the assistant coach. So you have some connection there. And of course, Lindy, right? The thumbnail for this podcast will likely be Lindy and Darcy standing next to each other as they did running the Buffalo Sabres for almost 2 decades. So, and Lindy might have a good amount of say right now in that organization. And again, I'm just kind of imagining what those meetings must be like right now in the building where they're talking about who should fill this role. And does Lindy at some point sit up and go, hey, anyone talk to Darcy recently? Maybe he'd do it. Maybe he'd be interested in it. I wonder if the name even comes up for them. Again, he does not work in hockey anymore, and he might have no desire, and maybe they would know that, and they would shut it down right away. But I'm just wondering about that, because this is often where the Sabres end up, is just going back to somebody that they know, because those are sometimes the only guys that they can get. So, Darcy. My opinion, by the way, on this, if they were to do that, is I would hate it. It would just look so, more than Lindy. Lindy, there was a reasonable defense for, all right, yeah, nostalgia and, just preying on the good feeling of Lindy with the fan base. But this dude has been the coach of a great young team as recently as 2 years ago. And even before that, 4 years before that, like 2 years before that. Like Lindy had recent success in the league that was defendable about bringing him in to be the head coach. This guy would be hiring someone that hasn't worked in the sport in 9 years. Very, very, very different on that front. And there also would be kind of the idea that you're right back where you started when Pegula took the team over, right? Oh, Darcy and Lindy are running things again. It's a circle. We're going around and around and around, right? There would be that. And the Sabres, I'm sure, even if they ever got to a point where they seriously considered this, they might just say, no, we shouldn't do it. Even if they thought he would be good in the role, because they don't want the look of it. The look of, man, you guys just can't get anybody to say yes to you. You got to keep reaching back into the old scraps. And I'm not sure they would love that either. So listen, by the way, my opinion on Darcy, though, when he was the Sabres GM, this is all about what I want him working in a front office now. I just don't know what would be like for someone that hasn't been in the league for 9 years. I liked Regier when he was the Sabre GM. Now, he wasn't perfect. I wish he was way more aggressive with trades and didn't hold his players in such high regard around the league. It really prevented them from being a lot of trades. But some of the draft picks and the teams that he built, of course, so 506 and, the Briere trade, and he made a lot of good trades. He just didn't make a lot of trades in general. Vanek and Pominville and Miller and Campbell, Finneganoff, and go on and on and on and on about the teams he built through drafting. But, I just a little more aggressive trade-wise would have been my forte. So, Darcy, what do you think? If you got an opinion on it. All right, when we come back, a couple other candidates that I want to mention, and then Jordan Greenway as a exit interview in our next of our series that's coming up here on Locked On Sabres. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is presented by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered where did all the money go? Between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, it is so easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. You stop just managing your money and you start building some wealth too. Managing money with your partner, that's smoother than ever. You could share tracked and shared personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without all the stress. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan some long-term goals. Take control of your money with Monarch Money. Control your finance with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, Advisor Watch. Not just Darcy Regier, who I know is a very unlikely candidate, but still someone I'm thinking about for it. But other candidates really quick that I wanted to mention on today's show that maybe have been mentioned around. I saw Dave Pagnotta talking about this on the fourth period, and he's, of course, the one that was reporting about Holland and Lou Lamoriello in the first place. Well, he also included as potential names the Sabres could consider that are not in an advisor role or a role anywhere right now, or in different roles. Chuck Fletcher, former GM of the Philadelphia Flyers. Marc Bergevin, GM of the Montreal Canadiens, former GM of the Montreal Canadiens, of course. Peter Chiarelli, who I talked about in our last segment. I think he's the worst GM in NHL history, but there's that. And then Pierre Dorion, who was the former GM of the Ottawa Senators. These are all people that have worked before in different organizations. Now, here is the thing, though, that makes me, again, like my mind keeps going back to Darcy, because what I'm looking for is somebody that's worked with Kevyn Adams before. Because, is Marc Bergevin going to come in cold to this organization for this role? That to me just seems so unlikely that a former GM like that's never worked with Kevyn Adams, maybe doesn't even know him that well, or anyone else in the organization, there's got to be a connection point somewhere. And I'm looking, and I'm having a tough time finding somebody. Maybe I'm missing someone obvious, but I'm having a tough time finding a guy like this. I mean, if you go back to the Carolina Hurricanes, I mean, Jim Rutherford is absolutely the name that would make sense here as the guy that has experience with Kevyn Adams, of course, because he used to run the Carolina Hurricanes, and even for that matter, Eric Stahl, because he's the special advisor. But Jim Rutherford's unavailable. He is the president of hockey operations in Vancouver. He is not going to leave that title in Vancouver to be the special advisor to Kevyn Adams in Buffalo. It's not going to happen. So unless, he gets fired by Vancouver, or if let me do a quick check on this. I'm just thinking of this now. Because of course, one, card you might have to play sometimes if you're Buffalo is, are you close to a guy's hometown in Ontario? And can I play that card? Rutherford is in his late 70s and, maybe he wants to live closer to home. And okay, there you go. He's from Beaton, Ontario, which obviously very far from Vancouver and is a 2-hour drive from Buffalo. So, all right, that's the best I could do. Does Rutherford get to a point where, Adams calls him and says, what are you thinking? How long are you going to be in that job? And at 76, I have no idea what Jim Rutherford is born there. Of course, he's been in Detroit and other places along the way, playing career, and then Carolina. So I don't know what his connection point is anymore. I'm just grasping at anything, and I'm having a tough time finding anything that connects a guy to this role. And I'm really wondering if they'll fill it at all. They'll fill it at all. All right, let's get to our exit interview of the day, and because it's going to be more on the back half of today's show, we'll spend a full episode on Owen Power, a full episode on Jack Quinn and JJ Peterka, and a lot more of the younger players in this team. But let's take a look at Jordan Greenway today. Jordan Greenway was looking around at some of his evolving hockey stuff recently and watching back a couple of his clips from the 24-25 season. And if you remember back at the beginning of the year, I was not a Jordan Greenway guy. Not a Jordan Greenway guy at all. I think I campaigned for him to be a healthy scratch at the beginning of the season. I was ready to move on. He obviously plays at the beginning of the year, and he doesn't get a lot of games in, but in the games he did get in, he looked really good. Looked very physical. I thought looked energized. Very good shorthand penalty killer. I mean, the best on the team, arguably. I mean, Tuck would score the goals, but Greenway gives you that defensive prowess in the 5-on-4 situation, but also at 5-on-5. And, of course, physicality, which the Sabres lack a lot of. Standing up for teammates and, watching the Florida Panthers in these playoffs. They just, in a third period, when the third period gets so tight and the refs put their whistles away, the games become more physical. And that is when guys like Jordan Greenway stand out. And I imagine if the Sabres ever get to games that are important like that, that they would be able to have success because of a guy like that. So somebody that I'm glad they re-signed and are obviously hanging on to. Signing a 2-year extension with the Buffalo Sabres, $4 million per year, I think is a completely fine contract. He has a 5-team no trade list. Now, last year, there were times where he played in the top 6. And that is, to me, just a step a little bit too far. I think on a third line, like when he was playing with Zucker and McLeod, that's a really nice situation. Because offensively, there still really just isn't a lot there. He doesn't have much of a shot. He's not that creative of a thinker in the offensive zone. I think he could have a year at some point in his career where he scores 15 to 20 goals because, stays healthy and he's sitting in front of the net. He's getting opportunities to cash in, but this is not a guy that is ever a threat when he is coming down into the offensive zone with speed, just roof one, or to go around a guy or whatever. Like, he's got to score his goals around the net. And last year, 3 goals in 34 games. Imagine that. I mean, that's where he's just a different sort of player. You're not getting offense. You also don't want him on the fourth line, though. But I liked his season, and it was 3 goals in 34 games. I think it should speak to the role that Greenway really plays. So, to me, I don't want him in the top 6. I want him on the third line. And I think pairing him with Ryan McLeod, to me, is perfect. Because McLeod, they balance each other really well. They're both very good defensive players. But McLeod has the speed and isn't quite as physical. And Greenway has that physicality, even though McLeod might not have much of it. And I think that pairing is one that they need to get back together at the start of next season. So happy they signed Greenway. If you are interested in some of the evolving hockey numbers from Jordan Greenway, and just for this podcast, I usually just try to show goals above replacement. I don't want to overcomplicate things. 71st percentile defensively, 16th percentile offensively in his last 3 seasons. So again, not somebody that is, to me, almost like, I never want to see him on the power play, but defensively, that guy's got a place on my team and is worth $3 to $4 million if he's going to give me an impact like that. So very happy with Jordan Greenway going forward, and glad the Sabres got that deal done. All right, exit interview series continues as we kind of look back on their previous seasons and look ahead as well. We will talk Owen Power next on the show. His value already, what his, potential partner we should be looking for in. A lot to get to coming up with him. So thanks for listening. The playoffs rolling along. We got the Amherst later in the week, so we'll get back into them as well. If you're looking for more playoff talk, be sure to check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion's crowned. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Talk to you tomorrow. You're on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.